Welcome to Raise the Roof, a bipartisan political podcast where we discuss local, real life issues with different members of our society and showcase the different political ideas, values, and opinions. I'm your host, David Chan, and joining us today is Jean Hernandez and Callie Gill.
Callie Gill is a Valencia High School alumni and will be attending UC Irvine in the fall. She is a strong social activist and runs an activism page on Instagram with over 16,000 followers. Before we get started, it's important to realize that we might all have different viewpoints on certain subject matters, and I hope that everyone remembers that each person is entitled to their own opinions and that we're simply presenting a wide variety of perspectives on these topics. All right, let's get right into the most discussed topic right now. What left-wingers and right-wingers are all talking about. A lot of what our news is circulating around the Black Lives Matter movement. So what are some of your viewpoints on BLM movement?
Well, I'd like to start off by saying that I am definitely left-wing, so if I express bias, then you know why. And I'm also a very strong advocate for the Black Lives Matter ideology. I think that addressing racial discrepancies and especially racially motivated police brutality is really important, especially in this day and age of social media where we can have video accountability on social media and such like that, so that we can hold people accountable in ways that weren't available before. Like, of course, police officers have body cams, but the LAPD at least has turned them off occasionally in instances of police brutality, or at least alleged police brutality.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, police brutality, that's just been, a huge talked about and discussed topic. Obviously, we all know that it's there, it exists in our world. And so if we're going to go a little bit more into, the effects of that, what do you think drives police brutality? Do you think that's more of like a more personal thing within each individual officer? And just also bringing in ACAB, do you think that this, like, should we, or like, how do you hold the officers that are engaging in police brutality accountable? How do you think that we should go about doing that as a society?
So I think that the motivation for police brutality is a combination of lack of accountability as well as just boredom. I read a couple of accounts from the police academy of police who have had partners or personally engaged in literally looking for someone to arrest because they were bored at night on their shift. And I think that that's probably not a good idea in general,
Right.
but regardless, subconscious and internalized biases are definitely going to surface when you're looking for trouble or
Right.
looking for someone to arrest. And also, officers are actively discouraged in both police academy and police departments from reporting racial discrimination or brutality among their colleagues, and they will get ousted and humiliated for trying to hold their teammates accountable, which I think is a problem.
Right. And if we're gonna transition just into more of like, I would say like the culture of how our police system works, what does ACAB mean to you? Like, I know, like, we all know that it stands for all cops are bad, but I do know that there's like a lot of different meanings to people just regarding that phrase itself. So what does that mean to you?
So I've been doing a little bit of research on it, and I talked to a couple of friends who align with it. And the notion is not that actually all cops are bad, because that's ridiculous and ultimatums are ridiculous, at least in my opinion, but rather that being complicit in a system that will uphold systematic racism and injustice when that's its purpose to do exactly the opposite and to protect justice and fight injustice. The fact that it upholds it is it's problematic,
Right.
to say the least. And the fact that they use the terminology of all cops are bad as opposed to just cops are bad is that saying, for example, not all cops or not all men can breed complacency, because sometimes people can hear that and think, oh, that doesn't apply to me, so I'm just going to keep doing the same thing that I do. And I can't say that I am immune to that. I've 100% done that before, so I'm not saying that everyone who does that is like bad or immoral or anything like that. But personally, I don't align with the ACAB movement. I absolutely think that there needs to be reform in the police system, but I just don't like using ultimatums, so I don't use ACAB.
Right,
I'm more
right,
comfortable with using FTP, but I just don't use it either of them in general. So
right. Do you think that there is a discrepancy between like the protesting that's going on between, because like we both know that there are peaceful protesters and we also see that there are rioters. What are your opinions on each of those, and how do you think that they affect each other?
just a warning, this one's going to be a little bit long-winded. So
No problem.
personally, as a pacifist and someone who has people to care for, I can't afford to be in a situation of a violent kind of riot. And also, I'm just kind of scared of being involved in a riot in general. So personally, I don't participate in riots or looting or anything like that. However, I am 100% white passing, and I am not at all able to be mistaken for African or of African descent. So I don't get to decide what African American people do to protest the death of their brothers and sisters. And I saw a comment from a mother who said, if my son had been killed by police, I would want to tear the town down too. So I think that's a completely valid perspective, because a lot of us can be blinded by love and compassion. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but the way that people respond to their emotions and grief
Mm,
is very different. And
mm,
if a lot of the looting and rioting was targeted specifically toward police owned businesses or police supported businesses, although a couple of small businesses and family businesses got caught in the crossfire, which I think is really tragic, especially during this time of economic shutdown because of coronavirus. Um, but if you refer back to the ADA, Adults with Disabilities Act, people were constantly writing their representatives and marching and voting, and nothing happened until a person in a wheelchair literally chained themselves to a bus, and that is what got the ADA passed. So
mm.
as much as I might dislike the extremities, it may be what's necessary for change in the
Right.
country.
What do you think about our country's reaction to BLM? Like we both know that there's a lot of different perspectives out there that are going around. Do you think that, the way we're reacting to it, do you think that's the right thing? Like, do you think we're doing the right thing?
Am I allowed to comment on the president and people in
Yes,
Congress?
yes, for sure. You
Great.
can.
Okay. So um, I think that the proportion of people who were protesting, say, the Stay at Home Act for coronavirus, and also at the same time advocating for the curfew in Anaheim and LA counties. Anaheim isn't a county, but Anaheim and LA, you know what I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
the riots and the safety of the citizens is a little bit concerning, because when the government says stay home or you will get sick and that is a danger to our society, you should probably stay home. And I mean, I don't have an opinion on the curfews, but if there's a discrepancy between your responses and your upholding of those specific stay at home orders, I'm going to have a problem with that.
Mm,
However, I think that regardless of how inspiring the insurge of Black Lives Matter um, movements around the country that there are, I hate to say it, but I think a lot of it is performative activism. There's a lot of like white suburban liberals who go there and have a photo shoot with their signs and then leave, instead
mm,
of actually, like, I don't know, shouting George Floyd's name or signing petitions to arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor, stuff
right.
like that.
So you think
And
like, oh, sorry. So like you think a lot of that is like, you think that a lot of, these people are participating in like virtue signaling.
I
Um,
think so, yeah.
right. Okay. So like a lot of the people are either going just to make themselves feel better than rather actually trying to implement or fight for any type of
Yeah.
change.
And I
Okay.
mean, numbers are great, but I would like the numbers to be genuine.
Do you think that there are a lot of people out there like you who are actually passionate about this, or do you think there's a lot of people just, doing it because of like the trend or because of virtue signaling?
I think it's really difficult to tell. There are definitely people who are doing it for a trend. Breonna Taylor's name became a meme. Like, people would use it for attention. And I think that's disgusting personally. But I also think that it might be a way to get the attention of that it needs. And I really can't tell with story posts, because
Mm,
I'd like to see the best in people as much as I can, but I really can't tell what's performative and what's not on social media outside of
right.
like specifically activism accounts, or if there's no commentary on it.
Right. Got it. I mean, that makes complete sense. And I mean, if we're gonna like talk about kind of like, you know, the BLM and the effect that it's having onto our society. Obviously, like this is happening while we are going through a pandemic, right? You know, especially right now in OC, our numbers are skyrocketing right now, and we're not seeing that going down. We're not seeing that go down for like our state of California. But do you think that there are any ties? And I know that you went into a little, like you went a little bit into this before when you were talking about people protesting, like protesting wearing masks and protesting the curfew and stuff. Do you think any of these types of protests, including BLM protests, have any ties to our COVID-19 numbers going up?
Absolutely. I don't think they're the main cause, but I do think that they have a huge impact. When I went to a rally in Yorba Linda a little while ago, almost no one was wearing masks. There was no social distancing. Some people were spitting on other people. It was not good. But when I went to one in Irvine, everyone was social distancing and wearing masks. So I think it really depends on the location. But
Right.
also that was right after like the Governor Newsom, I think, reinstated stay-at-home orders or something like that.
Right.
So I think I'm disappointed that a lot of the people participating in Black Lives Matter rallies are basically forgetting that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that's really dangerous and disheartening.
Right.
But I think there are ways to help.
And I think I already know where you're going to go with this. I think I know how you're going to answer this. Do you think that students should go back to school in the fall? And to what extent should we use remote learning?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that it depends on, because some schools are small enough to be able to practice social distancing and enforce mask wearing and like take temperature checks at the door and send kids home and not induce contact tracing. So I think it's possible for smaller schools, but who's to say that they will actually adhere to those policies?
Right.
I also think that schools opening up, especially in terms of college and living away from home, because a lot of students in college have dangerous home situations, or maybe they don't have access to reliable Wi-Fi or a way to access remote learning in a reliable way, and then they could miss assignments, and that wouldn't be their fault at all.
Right.
But I also think that considering the overcrowded nature of schools, especially public schools, it would be extremely dangerous to go back to school, at least for the fall quarter. What
Right.
UCI is doing is staying online for the fall quarter and making some stuff optional and adding support for other people, but they're also like, they have opened up the dorms, so in case people do need to live on campus, then they have the opportunity to. I don't know about Biola, but it's a relatively small campus. It's about 5,000 people. I think it's completely possible to uphold and maintain social distancing and protection and stuff like that at a school as small as Biola. But at Valencia, with the amount of space that we have and the amount of students we have, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Callie, for joining us on our very first podcast and discussing BLM and also COVID-19 and how that's impacting not just us as a community and a society, but also this country as a whole. So I just wanted to thank you so much for joining and talking to me about that today.
It's an honor to be here, David.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Callie.
Our first guest is Mayor Pro Tem and City Council Member Gene Hernandez. He's had a long career in law enforcement where he served for 34 years, achieving the rank of captain in the city of Orange before transferring to become the chief of police in Chino. All right, so let's jump right into it. Let's go into probably the most discussed topic right now, the Black Lives Matter movement. So do you think that you could just, kind of give us your general viewpoint on this movement?
Well, first, David, thank you for having me on this podcast. I think it's important that we hear a balanced discussion. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me, but you at least have to hear a balanced discussion, which right now, social media paints one side of this story.
Right.
You ask about the Black Lives Movement. That's actually a two-part question. There's the Black Lives Matter philosophy, and the Black Lives Matter movement, which is an organization. So I do, of course, support Black Lives Matter. In my opinion, all lives matter. And I know to say that is, quote, you're labeled a racist when you say that, and I still don't understand why, as opposed to the Black Lives Movement, which I don't support. And the reason I don't support it is because I believe that really truly is a a form of domestic, not terrorism, but domestic violence. They support, and they support this through their statements, which they've made many times, and including their current president, that we want change, we want it now. If we don't get it, we're going to burn it down until we get it. Well, that's to me unacceptable. We have a mechanism in our country for change, and that change comes through a process. And the process is in place. If you don't like the laws, then you as the people can change the law. But you don't change the law by saying, I can't wait, I'm going to burn it down. That's unacceptable. And the Black Lives Movement, I think, cherishes the fact that they want to destroy, in my opinion, our current form of government and start all over. And I don't know what that means or what that looks like. They have so many different voices speaking that I'm not sure really what it is they want, other than I know it's not by peaceful change, but more by violent revolution and overthrow.
Right. So when you say violent, revolution, and when you say, referring to, the destruction, you're obviously referring to like the protesters, or what some people call the rioters. Even here in California, not just in the several other states, we are also experiencing, some of these riots. Could you go a little bit more in depth on, how you feel about that and your opinions on, exactly what, this means to you?
I can. And before I mentioned that the Black Lives Movement, to me, is a hate group, in my opinion. And I think it matches those criteria to fit that description. But there are two distinctions between lawful, peaceful protesters and rioters. The First Amendment to our Constitution of the United States of America guarantees you the right to protest. In fact, it's very American to protest. If you dislike something, you have an absolute right to protest. What you don't have a right to do is do it violently, tear things down, vandalize, graffiti. That is not acceptable. That's a crime. And not only is it a crime, it's also a form of bullying. Because you don't get your way, you're going to bully people and physically assault them, which we've seen by the very liberal social media and Main Street media that shows it over and over again, a one-side narrative, which tends to influence people's opinion that, wow, this is really bad.
All right, so you've lived here in Southern California for you grew up in Burbank. You've lived here your entire life. You have a lot of experience. As a city council member, serving as chief of police. A lot about law enforcement. The procedures that are supposed to be carried out. When you see all these riots that are going down in Orange County, from what how are the police supposed to react? Because a lot of what's going around on social media right now, we see these video clips of police brutality on protesters, but there's also that other perspective where these protesters are acting unlawfully, destroying other people's property, vandalizing our community. Could you just go a little bit more in depth in what you want to see the police doing, if you think they're doing a good job right now? Or
Well, that's a very interesting question, David, and I think it goes very deep. And the reality is, this stems from an incident in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where a rogue police officer committed a heinous crime and killed George Floyd.
Right.
No one in the law enforcement community accepts that. We villainized him. He is a bad apple. They exist, and that's because they exist because we pick our police officers from our community. So the police department mirrors the community, and if you have bad apples, racists in the community, chances are you're going to have those in the police department.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that there's systemic racism. That has been alleged. That is the narrative. I have seen no data, no facts to show that that's the case. In fact, quite the opposite. After 34 years in law enforcement, I've seen extensive research in this topic to show that is not the case. So why do they focus on the police? Well, number one, we're the most visible sign of authority. We can take your freedom and we can take your life. That's powerful.
Right.
And the other issue with that is how have the police been acting, in my opinion, very professional. And again, we don't act independently. We act at the direction of the city council and the mayor. So if they want the city police department to not enforce laws, to dummy down that's the direction they give, that's how the police will act.
Right.
So How have they handled it so far, particularly in Orange County? Very professional. I think they have handled it with kid gloves. They've tried to be very, very sensitive to the issue, that people are upset. But a lot of that upsetness comes from misinformation or a lack of information. And I think that's what we in the police department need to make sure that people understand, that 99% of the men and women that serve this country that wear a badge are good, honest, ethical, moral individuals. Is there bad apples? Absolutely. Like in every segment of society, there are bad apples. But let's judge them on the facts, not condemn them with a broad brush that all police are bad.
Right.
How can you possibly say that? You can't say anything is all or nothing. You can't. That's like saying all Black Lives Movement people are bad people. Well, that's not true. I'm sure there's some that are good intentioned, many misguided, but they're not all bad. Just like all police are not bad, and it's ridiculous to say that.
Right.
Can we improve? Absolutely. Can we get better training? Absolutely. You know, the police have always inherited what nobody else wanted to deal with. If there was an issue, smoking comes to mind, where we wanted to ban smoking in restaurants and cafes. And so all of a sudden that fell in the lap of the police because no one else wanted to deal with it. So all of a sudden the police became the smoking police. We enforced unfavorable, unpopular laws. That's not right for the police. That's not just. That's not the best use of their services.
And going back to what you mentioned earlier about systemic racism, you said that, remind me what you said about it again.
I said, where are the facts?
Right.
We've had no facts to say systemic racism exists in the police department. We have not had that. We've had examples of it, but not anything studied to show, yes, systemic racism exists in police departments. That has been studied over the years, which have resulted in court orders that, you know, you had to hire a certain amount of minorities to balance things out. LA went through this for years. Did it help? Well, I ask you, what shape is their police department in today? Well, now they're defunding it. They're attacking it.
Right.
And by the way, defunding is not the answer. When you defund the police, you are taking away from those minority communities that count on the police to support them and be there to help them. We've seen what happens when you call 911 and the police don't show up.
Right.
We've seen store owners begging for assistance and it doesn't come. That's not a good situation for our country.
What do you think, especially because right now we're, going through a global pandemic, right? And we see, America's still struggling to, get our COVID cases under control. Do you think that, our spiking COVID-19 numbers right now, do you think that's correlated to, the protests that are happening?
Well, that's another great question. First, yes, the coronavirus, COVID, is real. There's no question about it, and its origins were in China. As much as people find offense in that, that's the case.
Right.
Did they do the best they could to stop it? I doubt it. In fact, I don't believe they did at all. So now we're stuck to deal with it. So today, you have protests. Well, as I recall, our governor said we need to hunker down. We need to self-isolate. And by the way, that's probably one of the first times I've ever heard in our history, or the history of the world, that healthy people had to self-isolate. Before, it was those that had the virus or the infection or the plague. They were the ones that isolated. Now we isolate everybody. There's a price to pay for doing that. I think that price is we're obsessed with physical health, despite the fact that it shows that generally young people have a stronger immunity to it than others. Most people could be able to work if they do at least two things. If they maintain social distance and they wear face masks, coverings. So I think if that were to happen, could we open up much more? Yes. Now, all of a sudden, we have the mayor of New York, de Blasio, saying, well, you have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech. That's an absolute right. And that right outweighs some of the other rights. So you have a right to protest. Well, since when does we put a priority on what amendment rights take precedent over others? That's a whole nother discussion for debate. So the reality is when people gather together and without shirts, with jumping around each other, with no social distancing, many with no mask, and you're going to tell me that that didn't impact the spreading of the virus? Don't believe your lying eyes. The reality is, yes, that does. And I'm sure that's why we had a spike too, because of that. So let's keep our eye on the ball. We all want to be safe, but I want mental health too. Keeping our kids out of school is horrible. There's a psychological price to pay, and it will be paid. Our young children need to go back to school within the confines of social distancing. Maybe their classes outdoors. They need that social interaction. We're going to pay a heavy price if we don't do that, and I mean our children are going to pay a heavy price.
Right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming out and having this conversation.
Thank you for asking the hard questions. These aren't popular questions.
Right.
My position is not popular, but I'll tell you what, I know it's right, and I'll let you be the judge of that when you do your homework. So you people need to get the word out there. And it's tough because I know what you're going to be bullied. You're going to be browbeaten, but that in and of itself tells you it's wrong. If someone doesn't want you to have a counter idea, what does that tell you?
Right.
I'm entitled to my own ideas. I'm still free until you take that freedom away, which they're working hard on.
Right.
So
And
thank you again, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And with that, I just wanted to remind the audience that, it's important to realize that, we all have different ideas, different perspectives. We all come from different backgrounds. And I just wanted to, just say that everyone is entitled to their own opinion. And so we definitely do not encourage, the cancel culture. We don't want anyone being attacked for having different opinions. And so, with that, Raise is just here to simply present a wide variety of different topics, and with those different topics, a wide variety of different perspectives, different political beliefs, different political ideologies. So thank you so much, Mr. Hernandez, for joining us today and being able to do this.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you so much.